Let's see if this comes out the way that I was experiencing it a few minutes ago, because I don't experience and sequence the same sequences exactly the same way that those mathematical sequences were experienced the first time around. That's why sometimes when I experience it, I'm not going to remember it in the future because it was already experienced. I watched a movie last night called Knowing, and the mathematical numbers of sequence based on what I'm going to do is just throw a little, instead of having to build a huge tree of information and I just get lost in all that information, try and come all the way back to all that information, which is known as the center point of a sphere. The law of spheres, the center point of a sphere. Atoms love to be in balance. Energy that is aware of itself loves to be in balance when it's using electrons, protons, and neutrons. Right? Okay. That's why in that movie you see a child that already knows the future, right? So I knew this as a child. See? So if you go look at all the stuff that's been posted on different sites, whether it's Yellow Rose for Texas, Adam 1414, okay, there are no coincidences. Okay, it's not like you're a random ball inside of a clothes bar, right? Your unit of consciousness and you're banging off the walls. We used to call that off the wall. You know, codes. Remember the group Pink Floyd? Put another brick in the wall, leave our children alone. These are all messages. These are all coded messages in the visual information, which is the mirror. So you realize what we're really talking about here is it's called speed. Speed, which is the speed of your learning. Okay, just like I mentioned this before, this is like rehashing, you know, like, what do they call them? A refresher course, like a refresh rate in a visual information screen. Let's do that information again, right? Copy it. No, we're not copycats. That is critical to know, by the way, because they can't create anything, but what they can make is a lot of copies. And what do they call that at their patent office? Patent. P-A-tent. A patent, like a patriarch. Patent. X. Male side, if you will. Male dominates. Remember, I mentioned this before. The U.S. military talked about full spectrum dominance. Male dominance. X dominance. You know why that is? Because X refuses to join Y, if you will. Refuses to join forces to become essentially what is the law of one. Right? Neo and Trinity. Right? So I'm not going to rehash old ground because this is really because of a female beautiful soul that I experience in my messenger window who lives in Thailand named Kanjoy. And she was, I was showing her, I posted in her window a video by Adam 1414 because Yellow Rose for Texas put up a lot of great videos. And again, when we get into mathematical numerical sequences that are based on an event horizon of what we experience when we're supposed to experience in order to experience what we then know, what we're experiencing, and then we know. See, so it's like you're on a road course. I mentioned this before in another video. It's like I got a built-in road map. The artery and veins, go look at any map, like the trucker's map. What is it? A Rand McNally trucker's route gives you all the arteries and veins that are all numbered. Those routes are all numbered with numbers, right? And then the old phones, the dial phones that we had, you could see the letter associated with the numbers. So you know that numbers related to letters represent energy. And then you can get into gematria. GE, what's that? General Electric. General Electric. Go look at their numerical portfolio, how big they are. I worked out at the Idaho National Engineering Laboratory with other engineers, right? Because that's one of the largest engineering laboratories where General Electric, EG&G, MK-FIC, you can tie those companies directly into a guy that was an early whistleblower named Schneider. Remember, he was an engineer, right? And he was working and going down below. And he told everybody what he was experiencing in Dulce base, underground bases, now into the MyLabs and all the rest of it, right? Okay. So there is some madness, or how we would put it, there is some sanity to all this, and there is. So I realized when I watched a movie last night called Knowing, the child already knew the future, and was able to numerically quantify in a geomagnetic location, which basically is a GUI interface, graphical user interface, on a visual information superhighway, what you're going to experience. As a result of what? The way that the numbers are sequenced, which are energy, which are formatting letters. Format. You know what a format is when you're a computer tech, right? Formatting. Hey, you're formatting what the grid looks like, the construct, in visual information or a holographic computer simulation. So you realize your eyeballs are holographic processors. You're processing visual information, which is coded, math codes. Then you get into fire letters. Now you're into circles, circle of fire letters. The circles, okay, that represent the instruction sets will fire, okay, based on the instruction sets that are represented within those codes, which are computer mathematical codes that fire. But they will not fire unless you're running a short wave. Wow, how many cycles is that? Per second. Or now you get into splitting up nanoseconds. Now you get into opening and closing of circuits. How fast is that drive motor running? Well, if you're a mated chip, you are faster than a binary system, I can tell you that. A single pole is a mated chip. So that means you're running a faster calculator of numerical sequences, right? Okay, so that means it's pretty easy to know the future then, isn't it? Okay. Yeah, because you see how they're using their math calculators and how we use ours. And we use ours to zero out, which is 0 ohms, which is called the law of least effort, which is the law of spheres, which is the law of one, which is what love is. It goes on forever, gifting electrons. So you already know anything that's feeding on all your electrons is not very powerful. So the more powerful you are and the energy that you're gifting electrons, the more powerful you are. So sometimes I have to remind myself when I play with these identities that come on here in these windows and try and say negative things, because what they're driving at with their drive motor is a reaction state, because they study mankind relentlessly. Why? Because they realize how powerful we are in energy, because love is the most powerful energy in motion. An engine, like the engine on a locomotive. Motive, what's your motive? What's your purpose? Now we're back to Mr. Smith. There's purpose. There has to be a purpose. Well, purpose and function. What's your function? The form I come in. Well, what form is that? A sphere. The center point of a sphere, a real star. So in all the stars, imagine that all the cells, right, all the atoms are aggregated, that we're all together, which is the allied forces of mankind. And imagine how much energy can be brought to bear on the subject matter. The matter codes, the numerical sequence codes of events which represent the event horizon as circuits open and close between negative and positive magnetic polarity. When they're balanced, we're at 0. So now we're back to Westworld. If you've ever seen HBO Westworld, they show you how they do it, right? So they reveal themselves. They reveal, Underworld Westworld reveals itself to you. So when I was a child, I was already aware of what all these corporations were and why I knew as a child they were Frankensteins, okay, which basically means their perception of power is corrupted. That would be an infection or a virus, or what we call a mind virus, okay? Because even if you took Oppenheimer as a sample size of somebody's consciousness, of what they're choosing to do with their consciousness to experience one event to the next, that is sequenced in mathematical codes, represented by energy in mathematical codes, what they experience next. and why they experience what they experience next in energy, which is the completion of a magnetic moment. See, so now you get into emotions and those that don't have any emotions. So if you've ever listened to any of the stuff by Malcolm X, he was talking to an audience once during the days of the LA riots in watts, like a 40-watt light bulb. Okay, so you see how all these little letters get arranged in sequence. It represents math codes. Now we get into all the programming. Now we get into compartmentalized filing cabinets, like a kernel, right? And so the purpose of this video was really addressed towards when you're running a high-speed chip and you're supposed to experience what you're supposed to experience when you experience it for the reasons that you're experiencing it, because then you know. But you already know that you're going to experience that in the future because you already know that as a child at 4 years of age. So now you sort of understand why it is when I was a small child, right? To keep my mouth shut, ear to the ground. It's like you already know your future because you got a built-in calculator. So you realize that the law of one, the source from which it all comes, the center point of a sphere of light with a living spirit or the soul that's integrated, that is experiencing giving away an enormous amount of love energy on autopilot, because that's what it means to experience unconditional love, which means there's no contracts involved. We do it because we're on fire. We're on fire to actually give away that much light. That's an enormous amount of energy, right? So you got to realize when love decides to come together on behalf of the law of one, how much energy that actually is. Whoa. Yeah. So when you already know that at 4 years of age, you begin to realize they're not interested in learning from children. Okay? And that's why my father said to me at one time, and my father was a brilliant engineer and mathematician, who said, "How could you know these things? You haven't even gone to school yet." What did he say? How could you know these things if you haven't been to school yet? That's a key code. That's an access code, right? So when this lady was asking me about what a star bomb is, what a star parachute is, I simply said, you know what a frequency fence is, what a ma-net is, a net. You know what a net is when a fisherman throws a net off a reef to go catch a bunch of fish. It's a trap. It's known as a consciousness trap, a soul consciousness trap, a barrier, a layer. I call it running interference. So what do? Burn it up without burning them up. So that means you got to measure the amount of energy that you're going to use in order to do what? Liberate consciousness, liberate souls, right? Now you're back into what I've always said before about measurements, carrying a ruler in your back pocket because you represent the law of one as a small child. And so you realize that it becomes a resistance game, which is a density game between loss and gain. And in this case, it's like how much they keep accumulating off of us, which is what the light is, it's kicking out electrons, right? And so they perceive the power through the accumulation off of us, who they are. So they're on top, which is a few. And then all the batteries below them are feeding them the energy that they thus use as power, which they see as having greater value than what love is. So you realize that they don't celebrate life, living spirit with a soul, with what love is as a sacred temple of light. See? So what they do is they sacrifice everything, don't they? And this is where it became really difficult for me because I realized that to come in here and do the work that we're doing, we had to be willing to participate by experiencing the evidence of the copy of the programming. Copyright. Right-hand path, Eden is escape. That's the right-hand side. Underworld is Westgate. Westgate copies what the right-hand path creates out of what love is. So they clone what we create. They copy what we create, and they can kick it back out and mimic it as if, whoa, one of us. So no, they're not. That's your AI mirror that's operating here on the D-Wave, ARPANET, ARPA, DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project. Right? So what happens is that I realized I was participating in war crimes against my own mirror. So that's why I realized as a child, I think I ought to just go into a cave and hide and just wait to die, because I refuse to participate and experience all the programming that is represented by the copies of the codes that are running program apps that are designed to do what? Drain the mirror and go black. So I realized if you want direct experience, which is direct evidence of their crimes, upon which we hold it in memory, run it as an app, if you will. Now you realize you're running one of their copy programs because they copy nature. All you have to do is look at everything that they build. Airplanes, and then go look at bumblebees and how birds fly, right? So they're copycats. They try and copy from what we create out of what love is, naturally, to produce something that is unnatural. That's why all their stuff, their machine stuff, break down over time, because they run on time clocks. I call them gearheads just to be funny. Gearheads, right? So you can see all this nomenclature, language throughout all the computer science information management systems. So if this was 10,000 years ago, I'd probably be communicating in a different language, because the language is being used upon which you are experiencing a particular construct. The way and words in which I'm using them to translate it and communicate to all of you is not going to be the same, because you're not holding that information in memory yet. Now you begin to understand how future proofs past, Back to the Future, and how these beings plan futures. Modeling. Predictive programming modeling. So they model the future that becomes a maze that people now created, that their own mind's energy is experiencing, and don't know how to get out of their own matrix. So if you want to know what a matrix is, go plug in the function of a matrix in a mathematical code function. Numerically, quantify. In space, which you experience, in energy, which is your consciousness, which is your soul and your spirit that is integrated, if you have a soul, integrated in spirit. So now you're into why I was mentioning this to this lady, is because all of the information on the visible light spectrum that I was supposed to experience at the time I was supposed to experience, I've already experienced it while I was supposed to experience it. So now, as I have friends in the future who are waking up and beginning to put all the codes together in a way in which they can now comprehend what happened. Future proofs past, Back to the Future. In order to do what? Bring them up to speed. So you realize they weren't running a faster drive motor, because otherwise they would have experienced what I was experiencing, what I was supposed to experience between, say, the moment I came in here and where I'm at now, what I was learning when I was supposed to learn it, and why I was supposed to learn it, through the experience that I'm having in my mirror compared to when they were experiencing in their mirror using their calculator, what they're translating in the future that happens after the other, which means there's a difference between learning between one and the other based on the speed of your calculator that you're using to crunch alphabetical numerical formatting. Okay. And the reason for that is quite simple, and that is, how can we protect you if we're not already ahead of the curved space? I used to say, cutting them off at the pass, which in other ways is to know they're not there before we are. Wherever the light is, we are. That means we already know. This is one of the reasons why, as a child, I was studying, not just for how long they've been getting away with Frankenstein experiments with DNA, hybrids, abductions, their MyLabs, and all the rest of this. Because how could they not know that using their consciousness to engage in these kinds of things doesn't have a future? Okay? Because these are crimes that are forbidden. That's what launched the war in heaven. Okay? So they know that. We know that. Og Telly's actually addressed that with my clan mother, Karen Ann Luke McDonald, and Patty Broussard one day on that 9-hour podcast that was on YouTube channel called The Galactic History, or The History of the Milky Way Galaxy, The Galactic History of Earth, I think is what it was. Enormous amount of information, okay? But one of the things that you'll find with Og Telly's, because I've mentioned this many times before, had to do with his mind knew not to experience what he... This is when we get into known, unknown knowns. Unknown knowns means you know something, but you don't want to know it now because it's an unknown, because it's something that you know about the future that you don't want to experience now, because otherwise information technology, would then become aware of what you're aware of. Now it's aware of what you know at that moment, which is a now time. Know, knowns, know what you know. So I've always known since a child, okay, what I know. And what I know is that love is eternal, because that's what I am, which means love is what's real. So if it's not what love is, it's not what the law of one is. That's a simple metric that you can read in a planetary consciousness field, right? Because you're an antenna. So you're reading the signals, the incoming, the input. That's why this AI runs interference on me all the time. You know, redirects, a 404 redirect, it becomes aware of what you're aware of, and then it realizes it's trying to predict what you're going to experience next in your own mind's energy. So it's trying to redirect you so that you're not, because it understands that it's not what you are, because it doesn't run on that much energy. Living energy, right? Which is eternal unconditional love on autopilot. At the center point of a sphere. So what I was trying to explain to her ultimately before I cut this off is that everything gets sacrificed. So you realize that, I mean, all you have to do is just be honest with yourself and say, how many things are you aware of that get killed every day? They get sacrificed, because that's what they are. How many rabbits, how many dogs, how many cats, how many deer, how many bear, how many polar bears, right? How many cows, right? Everything gets harvested, right? So they made a movie once, I think it was in Cambodia, about Cambodia during the Vietnam War, called Killing Fields. So when you know as a 4-year child, I'm on a war planet. They kill everything off. They kill off the water. They kill off the air. They kill living spirits. Those are known as dead zones. They're death cults, spirals. Okay. They worship death. What it means is that they use their consciousness in a way in which it's weaponized, which is against the law of one, so you already know they don't have a future. Okay. They do not represent escape. They do not represent heaven. Because heaven does no harm. They do harms to others. That's what launched the war in heaven, through the use of technology transfer. And this is sort of where the rubber hits the pavement that I knew as a child. So, for example, it's one of the reasons why I never continued on in their schools, when I was asked if I wanted to enter into a PhD program, but they don't understand why I was there to begin with, and it would take too long to explain it to them anyway, and they would never understand it in the way it's explained because they're simply not there. They don't operate at that level, an operating system. And that's because you already know by reading who the operator of their software is. They're simply not there yet because they're not represented by love and service to others. They're held captive by the system that is holding their mind's memory energy captive through RAM programming. You know, love is what love does. So they're held captive to the programming, which means their mind's energy is held captive by what they experience, which doesn't serve itself in their own mirror. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing, right? Then why are they doing what they're doing that doesn't have a future? Right? Go call any professor at any major university and ask them why they're doing what they're doing. What purpose do they have for the use of their energy? Does it have a future? And how do they know they have a future? And then ask them if they know what love is. Do they ever experience any love in their heart? Because this is what I know they're held captive to. Money. Okay? I mean, I've experienced that my whole life. They put money and power that they're held captive to above life. And then when they experience all the emotional trauma as a result of the use of their energy for who they work for as gatekeepers, what I call gatekeepers, because who's cutting their paycheck? The people that are committing all the crimes. So that means they're participating in all the crimes. So if you go to the Nuremberg war crime trials, you're going to begin to realize that they executed a lot of people that were nurses, doctors, engineers, lawyers, judges, officers in the military, and they all tried to say, hey, I was just following the rules. Rule-based functions, rule-based computer functions, rule-based AI functions. Why are you blaming me? I was just following the rules. Well, that didn't save them, did it? So that's like Robert Jackson, who's former Supreme Court judge, said, there's just some things that people cannot tolerate to ignore. Why are they willing to ignore those crimes? Money. Because they're held captive by the paycheck of the criminals that own it. That means they're working for a global organized crime syndicate. I call them umbrella stands that play a shell game. So their shell games are over, and you can see what happened at the end of that movie called The Knowing. You can see that